So today we speak with a medical doctor, a mythologist, an author, an illustrator, all of that rolled into one, Devdutt Pattanaik. Welcome to the show. Devdutt has authored 30 books, 600 columns, has done 4 TV shows. He continues to write, but today we really speak to you from a very different space. We speak to you as a visual artist. I mean, you've achieved so much.
Some Maya.
Well, Maya, absolutely, sure. But we really want to know, where did this journey begin? Talk to us about your childhood, about your growing up, your family, what did you read, and how did mythology and within that art really creep in?
From what my parents tell me, when I was a child, I used to doodle a lot. And I used to doodle on the walls, and my father let me, The relatives would say, he's spoiling the walls. But my father said, no, a child has to do it, let him do it. And, my sisters weren't interested in doodling, but I would. And they were much older than me.
So the girl and a boy thing?
2 sisters. My 2 sisters elder than me, much elder than me. Like, I think my 8 years older than me. And when I would draw on the walls, I would be this curiosity in the neighborhood. It keeps drawing everywhere. I think that's where my body started learning art. That's my first exposure to art.
Sure.
Mythology was like any child at that age, Amma Chitra Katha, Chanda Mama, nothing special, nothing's out of. My parents were not particularly religious. We were just like an average Hindu household. Not temples during festival time, not religion is not an important part of your life. Education was, studying was, and as part of when you're studying, and I was interested in science, so diagrams become important. So illustration for me was diagram school. I looked at it not as art but as diagrams.
Explaining concepts.
Concepts. Schematic diagrams. And when I went to medicine. When I was studying medicine, then schematic diagrams become more and more important. Because, to learn surgery, when you're doing medicines, flowcharts become important, and the visual representation of the body, the visual representation of a disease becomes very important. So art for me came through a very technical field, the medical field. I was interested in art, yes, aesthetics, but I don't think that was a very explicit part of my life. So illustration for me was diagram school. I looked at it not as art but as diagrams.
Explaining concepts.
Concepts. Schematic diagrams. And when I went to medicine, when I was studying medicine, then schematic diagrams become more and more important. Because, to learn surgery, when you're doing medicines, flowcharts become important, and the visual representation of the body, the visual representation of a disease becomes very important. So art for me came through a very technical field, the medical field. I was interested in art, yes, aesthetics, but I don't think that was a very explicit part of my life.
Right.
It was very much in this domain of science, and art comes to me through science.
Through science, right, absolutely, which is why straight lines and very clean is what even your illustrations are
Schematic,
today.
diagrammatic, that's the words that will come when you look at my work.
Absolutely, fascinating. Is there a mythology of art? Is there anything like that?
The word kala, one of the meaning of the word kala is art, right? And comes from the word kal. Kal is time, and time is mortality, and kala is that which breaks mortality and takes you towards the infinite, the immortal. And that's how kala as a concept emerges.
Right.
And kala can be visual, and so you have yantras, symbols, diagrams. The visuals, in India, the communication of the divine came to you in different forms, cognitively, viscerally, and they would, so it's not just the words but also images would be used to communicate, rituals would be used, so symbols were used, different techniques were used to talk to your indriyas or your senses, and the senses are sort of large number of stimuli implode into you. So when you go to a temple, it's what you see, what you hear,
what you smell,
at some your emotions are being stirred through songs, your mind is being stirred through ideas, your senses are being stirred through what you see. That's why darshan is important. They say dekho, look at what? Look at the deity, and the deity is presented to you as an art piece. So I always say, rituals are performing art. There is visual art all the time. The way the Bhagwan darwaza khulega, there's a lot of drama.
Right.
In Nathadwara there'll be a backdrop, the pichwais. There's fragrance happening. You're seeing things, color, music, drama. It's a presentation. You are being, so it is like in a museum, right? Lighting matters. So the lamps are lit in a particular way. Particular lamps are used to show the deity. How much of the light is used? You talked about how the sunlight reaches in certain parts. You know, the way the temples are designed. So art is used to communicate a whole bunch of ideas, and art plays a very critical role in communication. You cannot have Hinduism without art. You know,
Fascinating,
so,
absolutely.
in fact, you can't have any religion without art.
Right.
Even any, you know, aborigines have their tribal art. Art, tattoos are part of ritual. Are they art? Are they ritual? You can't separate the two.
Right.
But they are kala, which takes you away from kal.
And all of that put together is the experience that you really have to go through.
Yes. So you can't really separate. Or you know, this textual approach to religion is a very 19th century, 18th century Germanic approach. There's a Protestant who rejected art. You know, the Protestant Revolution in Europe, which rejected Catholic art, and therefore this approach of looking at Indian, in trying to understand Hinduism, trying to understand without looking at art. And therefore we have terrible buildings today because we have stripped a culture of a visual vocabulary, of an aesthetic vocabulary, a color vocabulary.
Which is very different from our traditional buildings. I mean, even if you see the ornate and the design and the whole karigari done on it is very different from what you see.
You know, Rabindranath Tagore kept talking about it. You know, this is art was, he was very important, but art, we like the disembodied arts. Therefore music survives, and the only place where art really survives is Bollywood. You know, the popular art, but the traditional classical arts have been sort of reduced to museum pieces, which is very tragic. It's not live. We don't live in art as much as we used to. We live at best in kitsch, industrial kitsch. We don't enjoy. So when I look at people, you know, this sense of design is missing. The sense of design in the way you cook. You go into kitchens and they're industrial American kitchens.
Yeah, it's just a assembly line of sorts.
Yeah, modular, and which you can buy from a retail space. But the aesthetics of art is forgotten. How food is served, the thali, or they're following it mechanically. It's mimicry. They're not understanding the principles. So even how the food is served, you know, now we put cutlery.
Right.
We don't use how's the brass plate or how the leaves are used.
Eat using your fingers.
And how the food, the color of the food, different colors of the food have to be. A good food should have different. So all that aesthetics and visual mythology is, well, hopefully it will revive. Everything comes and goes.
Absolutely. So there are books where you actually do not have any illustrations,
Yes.
and there are books where you have a few illustrations.
Yes.
So again, is there a thought process on how do you decide that?
See, for example, the recent TV show Devdutt was just transcripts, so I didn't or translations. So there was no art involved in that at all. But if it was, let's say there's a calendar art series where I work on, then I'm actually explaining iconography. So I need the temple iconography. I need calendar art. So then my art is not important. I'm explaining an object. I'm explaining which is already pre-existing. So that's a no-brainer. But I use my art only when I'm explaining concepts, when I'm trying to explain the idea of Vishnu.
So is it because it is a complicated sort of a concept or a sort of a visual that you're trying to create with your art? Is it to help the viewer sort of move that one step forward to sort of visualize?
So in my first book, which really uses a lot of my art, is Myth is Equal to Mithya, which is the Penguin book, and the second one is Jaya Mahabharat. And if you look at Myth and Mithya, the diagrams are trying to explain. So I use a lot of geometry. So I say the circle of nature, the square of culture. I'm using different words to explain, you know, what I call yantras. Yantras are instruments. Instruments are being used to explain an idea. So I use words, I use diagrams, I use illustrations, so as to give a holistic experience, because these ideas are very complex.
Right, absolutely.
And so I need diagrams. So I really, it's my science mind. It is the side which is the medical mind at work. If I was explaining someone the heart, I wouldn't just do it through words. I would use actions, gestures, I would use analogies, I would use diagrams. That's exactly what I'm doing when I'm explaining Shiva or Vishnu.
Very, very fascinating. You do all the illustrations completely yourself.
Yes, I do. Sometimes I get, my sister, my cousins, or whoever is around to fill the lines. Because sometimes it's just straight lines to be done. Like in Jaya, my driver was helping me out. So because they're simple lines, and I do this game. When I do workshops, I used to do a lot of workshops, and I use art a lot in my when I'm giving workshops. And let's say I'll draw a turtle. and I will what I will do is I will get people to fill in the, so everybody feels they're participating,
Right.
and just draw simple lines, and people don't realize the power of simple lines cleverly placed creates extremely complex art. You know, it's like Islamic art is really simple designs used in an intelligent way.
And multiples.
Multiples.
Repetitive.
So
Yes.
fractal systems. So this is very geometric. And I use that a lot in my work also. I use a lot of geometrical principles to create. And then you realize that Indian art is also designed around it. You know, everything is based on squares, circles, triangles. And there's a lot of geometry before you actually start the images. You know, Ganesha's statue will have a particular system.
And proportions,
proportions are the most
pretty,
important.
Pretty predefined.
Indian art is completely revolves around proportions. Although I don't really follow that in my drawing, I'm intuitive. I think somewhere along the line, the years of doodling and the medical background gives my body proportions is for me instinctive.
Exactly. So that's where it all sort of keeps coming back.
I know
to
exactly. My proportions don't go wrong. I don't know how my body's muscle is trained to do it. So I don't think about it. In fact, when I think, the body proportions go wrong.
Clearly, a lot more that you're doing with your art. Actually, it's also broadening the horizon in so many interesting ways.
I want people to think that. I want them to. You see, the whole idea is to expand the mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've taken your art literally to the walls as well.
Yes, I have. I use my house, you know, as a child I used to doodle on the walls. Now I turn, you know, my friend said, oh, you know, what, children are punished for this. And you have turned this into an art form.
Exactly.
So in my heart, you know, my decoration of my house is very inexpensive. I just draw on the walls. And I paint over them because I believe art, I have this problem with keeping things, preserving things, because traditional Indian art like rangolis or, you know, women who painted their houses in Rajasthan.
Impermanence.
It's impermanence. You do it on cow dung, you put the glass beads, you decorate your house, but then it goes away. It's not permanent. And I believe that. So when I finish my artwork, I just scan them or I just tear them apart. And people said, how can you do that?
Right.
Nowadays I've started gifting it to friends.
Wow, fascinating.
Of course, I tell them it's non-archival paper, so it won't last forever.
There you go. So it's not permanent.
It's not permanent, but I'm trying to go into the art space, and let me see. That's another world and another journey.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, we must take a break right now. We will be right back, and it's an interesting discussion that you don't want to miss. So let's move to business of art.
Yes.
Right. What in your mind and sort of where you see the world from, you know, again specifically from the Indian traditional art, heritage, culture, mythology, all of that put together, it sort of contextualize this for us in a global sort of sense and the business aspect of all of this put together.
You know, I feel everything in the world, with its storytelling, or it all begins, it has an economic base. It always starts with economics. Why am I saying this? Because you look at plants, you know, what are the plants doing when they're growing? They're not just growing, they're going after sunlight. They're going after food. They're going after that which nourishes them. And that which nourishes them is Lakshmi.
Right.
Lakshmi is economics.
Sure.
So the nature revolves around the search for Lakshmi, which is food.
Which is the competition and survival
So
of
everything
fittest.
revolves around that. You're fighting about it. And in human society, we call it money, we call it wealth, we call it property. And therefore, even an art, you know, profession, so the artists, the sculptors, the artisans, they did it, for them it was profession.
Right.
They are doing it because it's their job. The temples were not built for the sake of art. This was someone's profession. The stone carver, the quarryman, there's an economic aspect to it.
There was also a lot of patronage.
Patronage. And, you know, yes, so that is the Lakshmi part of it. Then there is the Durga part of it, the power part of it, where art also communicates power. There's politics embedded in it. Which god do you paint? Which images do you do?
Right.
Who do you put first? Who do you put second? What material do you use?
Sure.
When do you use metal? When do you use gold? When do you use silver? For whom are you doing it? Who is your patron? So the politics is embedded in the art. And then comes Saraswati, you know, which is the idea. The idea.
Concept itself.
Yes.
Right.
So, you know, the people have figured out that the early cave paintings were the human being's expression of language. They were trying to express themselves. They were, for the first time, consciousness was emerging. And, you know, humans draw, right? Animals don't. We draw because we want to express something, we want to communicate something. So drawing and art emerges from the desire to communicate. But that is the Saraswati part of it, and it is through the art also I'm trying to get meaning in my life. What is my meaning? Who am I? And therefore, all art in the world is about meaning. So you have to. So in India, for me, when I see this, when I look at the world of business of art, I don't separate creativity from economics from politics. You can't do that. I'm not comfortable with this propaganda activism art which is going around right now, which looks at art as political. Art is always political. At the same time, it's aesthetic. At the same time, it is economic. It's a combination of everything.
Coming together, culmination of it. Yes.
And this propaganda art, which is social justice art, is no different from feudal art. It's just another form of politics, and it just takes a different shape.
Right.
So where Durga overpowers the Saraswati.
Right.
The Saraswati is also important. When I look at Saraswati and what are you expressing, the technique, the technology, the idea, the instruments used, the medium used,
Sure.
How is it presented.
Sure.
So there is Saraswati, there is Durga, there is Lakshmi, all simultaneously.
It's not necessarily in equal proportions at all times. One sort of takes over. And
See, depends. The artist may do it only from an economic point of view.
Correct.
For him, it's just, he's a craftsman. Let's say a craft. Also the artist is a very Western notion, because this whole idea of individual expressing themselves is a very romantic European notion of art.
And very contemporary to India.
Very contemporary.
Absolutely.
And it is also breaking away from context. And I don't, this whole post-structural movement, and I want to break free. Traditional Indian art is within structure, is within context, and is usually expression, and the highest form of art in India is connecting with the divine.
Right.
Whatever the divine is,
Sure.
whatever the divine, not divine as the West sees it as God and church, which I don't see Western scholars and even Indian artists are very familiar with Indian art. There is this kind of a very condescending view of religious art based on what the West looks at religion as. So I think Indian art has not really, there are art students who have written about it, but they're sort of sidelined and they're not major scholars. But I feel I'm uncomfortable with this individualistic art because of my background in mythology. I want to see what are the ancestors communicating.
Right.
I'm interested in communication, which is happening over generations.
Communication, interpretation, sort of visually.
Yes. You see, interpretation which doesn't disturb the original communication.
Again, within the frame.
Within the
Within
framework.
that
Because otherwise the individual comes in so deeply and breaks the structure. You want the structure to become more accessible. So interpretation that makes the structure more accessible.
And stronger.
Stronger. So Vishnu has to be explained to people. I've used a diagrammatic and schematic to explain Vishnu, not to present Devdutt Pattanaik. Devdutt Pattanaik is not important.
Correct.
It is Vishnu who is important.
Correct.
I'm enabling it through a particular form of art. So I think when you're looking at the business of art, so it is, you have to see it in all three levels, from a political angle, from an economic angle. When I look at a temple, for example, temple is economics, temple is politics, temple is also wisdom, identity, meaning. And I have to look at it from all three angles. Only then will I appreciate a temple or an architecture or something of that sort. So I think that is for me very important. Design, yantras, the word Sanskriti basically comes from the word Akriti means shape, and Sansk is a complete shape, a well-designed thing, something which is well-designed. And Indian, and that for me, it's how do you design it well, how do you present it so that it communicates. So the viewer is very much the consumer. If you talk about economics, my art has a consumer. It is not independent of the consumer. And whether the consumer, he's consuming it or buying it depends, those are details.
Right.
But he has to consume it.
It's a format of consumption that's less important. But tell me, when you talk of your consumer and your art is for your consumer, that makes sense also. But is your consumer essentially Indian, or is your consumer global? And how would a sort of a global audience typically consume the art, or for that matter, even your writing?
I write for Indians. I'm focused on India. I'm not really interested in the global market. If you ask me, hand on my heart, they don't matter. As a child, we grew up thinking the West was something glamorous. Going abroad, foreign, this was this magical word, because we lived in license Raj, right? And we had to. But for some reason, I never found joy in it. While I would enjoy it at a very aesthetic level, my meaning and joy came from India. And I wanted to share this with my Indian friends.
But Indian heritage culture in itself, and mythology for that matter, I mean, is a huge industry.
It is.
And globally has a place and context today.
Yes, but you see, unless we respect it and we consume it, they may or may not come, it doesn't matter. My
Absolutely.
art,
Yeah,
it's
that
like
makes sense.
the Aborigines do their art for themselves. It's part of their ritual traditions, not because someone is going to see it in New York. The New York consumer doesn't matter. We give them too much importance. They don't matter. The village woman who's doing her house paintings, it is for her pleasure, her consumption, her family's consumption.
Or the rangoli
Or the
that you
rangoli.
every morning it is done.
Yeah, during festivals we do the way we decorate our house. It's for my consumptions, my family's consumption, my friends' consumption. And it contributes to the local economy and the local politics and the local identities. I'm not interested in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, buying my artwork and keeping it in their cupboard. Yeah, it's good for the money. Maybe they'll pay millions of dollars, but that's it. They don't matter.
That's not at the core of what you're trying to do.
If that becomes the core of your being, you're stripped of your soul. And I am in the business of finding the soul and expanding the soul. And for me, that's Brahmana. That's expanding the mind.
Well, this was a very fascinating, a very intriguing discussion. Thank you very much for talking to us. And it's pretty much the first time the world will be listening to you as a visual artist.
Thank you.
Devdutt Pattanaik, the artist. Thank you very much.
Thank you.